In this class, let us understand how to compute time of supply for services. Till now, we were discussing about supply of goods. We were discussing how to calculate time of supply in case of goods. Now, we need to understand how to calculate time of supply for services. It is different for goods, it is different for services. But the process, how do you start? It is still a little bit same. Whenever you see the problem, first step is to get the relevant dates. Let us directly see one problem, then we will discuss how to calculate or how to compute time of supply. The problem goes this way. Ram, a chartered accountant, provided auditing service on 15th of September. Invoice was issued on 10th of October. Payment was received on 5th of October. So now, as this is the time of supply chapter, the question is full of dates. The first step, as I told you, is to extract relevant dates. So what are the relevant dates? There are 3 relevant dates. How to remember these 3 relevant dates? There is a shortcut. It is IPS. I stands for invoice date, given in the question. P stands for payment date, again given in the question. S stands for date of service. S stands for date of service, which is also should be given in the question. So 3 dates. I stands for invoice date, P stands for payment date, S stands for date of service. So you have to write it in this order. So first step is fill up the column. Now you tell me what is the invoice date? It is 10th of October. It is the invoice date. What is the payment date? It is 5th of October, again given in the question. The third column is service date. Now it is what is the date of service? It is 15th of September. So we found the 3 dates. Now we have to calculate time of supply. How to calculate time of supply? It is very simple. Earliest of the following. If you say this is the answer, then you are wrong. We used to compare all the 3 columns together in case of goods. But it is little different in services. What is the difference? You can't compare 3 columns together. There is one more step. There is one more step before computing time of supply. What is that step? That step is to see whether the invoice is valid or invoice is invalid. How to calculate, how to compute whether an invoice is valid or invalid? For this, you need to know what is the last day to issue the invoice. If the invoice is issued within the last day to issue an invoice, it is a valid invoice. I repeat, if the invoice is issued within the last day to issue the invoice, it is a valid invoice. But if the invoice is not issued within the last day to issue the invoice, then it is an invalid invoice. So second step is to see whether the invoice is valid or invalid. Now there may be a question, what is the last day to issue the invoice? We already discussed in our invoice chapter, but still, if you don't remember it, then let us quickly have a look at it. First, let us discuss about normal supply of services. We are dividing it into 3 parts. First one is a supply by a normal person. The second one is supply by banking institutes. The third one is supply between distinct person. All this with regards to services. First, let us learn about normal cases. We will take a simple example to understand what is the last day to issue an invoice in case of supply of services. Say I am an auditor and I provided auditing service. So I provided the service on, say, September 15th. I provided the service on September 15th. Now, what is the last day to issue the invoice? The Act says, the GST Act says, the invoice shall be issued not later than 30 days. That means the last day to issue the invoice is within 30 days from the provision of service, I need to issue the invoice. In my case, I provided the service on 15th of September. So I need to issue invoice within 30 days. 30 days from 15th of September is 15th of October. So the last day to issue the invoice is 15th of October. So now we learned that invoice, if it is issued within 30 days, it is a proper invoice or it is a valid invoice. So if it is issued after 30 days, it is an invalid invoice. Now the second step is to see whether the invoice is valid or invalid. Let us see in our case whether the invoice was valid or invalid. When was the service provided? It was provided on 15th of September. So what is the last day to issue the invoice? It was 15th of October, being the 30th day. When was actually issued? When was invoice actually issued? It was issued on 10th of October. So now you tell me whether the invoice was issued within the prescribed time. Yes, it is a valid invoice because it was issued within the prescribed time. So now you decided that yes, it is a valid invoice. So step 2 is to check whether it is a valid invoice or invalid invoice. Now the question comes, sir, why do we have to compute whether it is a valid or invalid? Because for step number 3, if it is a valid invoice, you have to compare only I and P. You have to compare IP. What is IP? Invoice date and payment date. If it is an invalid invoice, you have to compare P and S. If it is an invalid invoice, you have to compare payment date and service date. Now in this sum, whether it is valid invoice or invalid invoice, we already calculated it is a valid invoice. If it is valid invoice, we have to compare only 2 columns, which is that I and P, invoice date and payment date. What is the invoice date? It is 10th of October. What is the payment date? It is 5th of October. So whichever is earlier. So in this 2 column, which is earlier date, that is the payment date, that is 5th of October is the earlier date. So 5th of October is the time of supply. I repeat, be careful, don't compare 3 columns together. In the second step, compute whether it is a valid invoice or invalid. If it is a valid invoice, then in the third step, compare I and P, that is invoice date and payment date. Now you should have already come to know that how to compute time of supply in case of services. Step number 1 is fill up the dates, that extract the relevant dates and fill up in IPS format. I stands for invoice date, P stands for payment date and S stands for date of provision of service. So after the first step is done, second step is to see whether the invoice is valid or invalid. If it is valid, the third step, you compare I and P, that is invoice date and payment date. If in the second step invoice is invalid, then in the third step you do compare only payment date and date of service. So one important thing, I am repeating it again, in service case, do not compare 3 columns simultaneously. Always see whether the invoice is valid or invalid.